Lassiter Factor.
What's up, all my movie-loving maniacs? This your boy Bangful B of the Lassiter Factor, and back in April, they re-released Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, in the theaters in honor of its 20th anniversary, which I was super excited for, and I did go to, and I had so much fun rewatching it on the big screen for the first time in 20 years. But prior to that, I just felt like rewatching every single Star Wars movie that ever came out because my relationship has changed over the years, depending on the era. Now, of course, I've watched all the movies in release order, but every time a new one came out, I've always watched them in chronological order, and this time around, I just wanted to do something a little different. There's this thing called the Machete order, and if you don't know what that is, here's a quick explanation. Back when Star Wars just consists of episodes 1 through 6, the Machete order was a viewing order in which you watch the Star Wars saga in a non-linear way, and it would help make for a better viewing experience, particularly towards the prequels. Because while I'll always have a nostalgic place in my heart for the prequels, I can't deny the fact that they are flawed movies. And many people feel that way. So the Machete order was a more fun way to watch the prequels, and still made sense in the context of the greater saga. So the Machete order used to be Episode 4, A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and then that's when you go backwards in time. Most people didn't include The Phantom Menace, but you can if you want to. I know most people just included Episode 2 and 3, but otherwise, yeah. First you watch Episode 4, then Empire Strikes Back, then Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, and then Return of the Jedi. And this Machete order made sense because after the reveal in Empire Strikes Back that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father, you would then go backwards in time to learn how his father became Darth Vader. And then you would go forward in time to Return of the Jedi for the epic conclusion, and it would make Darth Vader's eventual return back to the light that much more impactful. And this viewing order still works. I mean, I basically got a whiff of it with the new Machete order that I did. But overall, you get the concept. You start off strong with episode 4 and 5, and then you take a dip a little bit, but then gradually go back up and end off on a good note with Return of the Jedi. But now with all the Disney era stuff, things have changed. I mean, maybe it hasn't for you personally, if you're one of those people that only sees the original trilogy as canon, or just the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy as canon. But with the newer movies, the Machete order changed, and there is many ways that you can go about doing it. And believe me, I went back and forth on which one I wanted to do. But I did eventually figure out the Machete order in which I wanted to try. And so I tried the Machete order, I did it, and I gotta say, my experience of watching the Star Wars saga in Machete order changed. I will explain how, but before I get into that, let me take you through a run of my history with the Star Wars saga from the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, the sequel trilogy, and its spin-offs, because context does matter. For as long as I can remember, I have always loved Star Wars. Ever since my dad rented the 97 special editions from Blockbuster and I watched Star Wars for the first time. It's like my mind was just blown. A completely imaginative world that all came from the mind of George Lucas. And that's one of the things I love about Star Wars as a franchise, is that it's all in the mind of George Lucas. He made something and turned it into a multi-billion-dollar franchise. And in a way, that's also what inspired me to get into filmmaking and try to write and create my own stories. And I have Star Wars to thank for that, and it's the reason why Star Wars, more specifically the original trilogy, are some of my favorite films of all time. But like I said, the 97 special editions were my first introduction to Star Wars, unfortunately, depending on who you ask. But all the changes for that specific special edition aside, I was still blown away by Star Wars, especially at an impressionable age. And of course, I still have the VHS copies of the 97 special editions to this day. This is a prized possession of mine. As far as each film individually, let's go through them, starting with the OG trilogy, the original Star Wars trilogy, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. Now, of course, there are purists out there that just likes to refer to Star Wars A New Hope as just Star Wars, and I understand that, but I ain't petty like that. I'm calling it as George Lucas intended, Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Now, I'll admit, while A New Hope isn't particularly my favorite Star Wars movie, I will always have a place in my heart for it because it is the movie that paved the way for the rest of the franchise. And you gotta think, this movie came out in 1977 off of the heels of Jaws, which came out 2 years earlier. Jaws walked so that Star Wars could run. This movie not only set the standard for the franchise going forward, but for blockbusters in general. Empire Strikes Back, on the other hand, which is my favorite within the franchise, it not only set the standard for what a sequel to be, but it also expanded my idea of what a sequel to be. It's movies like this as to why Infinity War is my favorite Avengers film. I like seeing the heroes fail because it makes their eventual victory in the third and final movie worth it. And this is one of those movies I wish I could have been a fly on the wall when it was originally released, because I can only imagine everyone's face with the big reveal of Darth Vader being Luke Skywalker's father. Return of the Jedi, on the other hand, while not particularly everyone's favorite, but it is a favorite of mine. And some silly stuff here and there, it will always have a special place in my heart because of how it concluded this particular trilogy. All the emotional stuff between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader are what makes this movie for me. And plus, it just harkens back to just being a fun Star Wars adventure. Now, of course, me being into Star Wars, of course, I had all the merch as a child. I had all the toys. I remember all the action figures. I had this Hoth toy set. I even had the Hoth ship that they used during the Battle of Hoth. I had the Jabba the Hutt and Han Solo action figure. I had some of the ships and vehicles that were miniatures. I had this R2-D2 cassette player. And of course, I had some of the video games. I had my own lightsaber. I dressed up as Darth Vader one year when I was in elementary school. And I even had this Lando action figure where he was in his disguise in Jabba's palace. And of course, I have to mention the music, which was all by John Williams. He went hard in the motherfucking paint when making the music for Star Wars. I'm telling you, the rent was due when John Williams made the music for this movie. So much iconic music, and this is just the original trilogy. We haven't even gotten to the music he made for the prequel trilogy, but speaking of which, let's get into the prequel trilogy. Now, obviously, there was like 14 or 15 years in between the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, and everybody was just waiting to see what George Lucas was going to do with Star Wars, and sure enough, he was right in the prequel trilogy, which would tell the tale of how Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader, and everyone was anticipating that, and it all started with The Phantom Menace. And I remember the hype for this movie was real. The marketing and merchandise for this movie was on full overdrive. I vividly remember my parents taking me to the theater to go see a brand new Star Wars film. And the prequel trilogy in general will always have a spot in my heart, but as I grew older, I come to realize that not everybody liked the prequel trilogy, and understandably why, but still there were so much things to admire about these films. And plus, it also have a special place in my heart because it is the Star Wars trilogy that I grew up with. Unlike the original trilogy, I was introduced to that. Whereas with the prequel trilogy, I was there when each film was released in theaters. I saw Phantom Menace in the theater, I saw Attack of the Clones in the theater, and Revenge of the Sith in the theater. So those three movies were essentially my earliest Star Wars theater experience. Now, of course, I did have all the toys and merchandise. I had those little action figures that came with those little pods that you slip on the little communicator thing and then it'll say something. But I had one for Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, Jar Jar Binks, Darth Maul, though I didn't have that for that particular character, but it was an action figure that was given to me by my old drum teacher. I collected some of the pods from Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and KFC. I had this pod racing alarm clock, which used to drive me crazy, but I still remember to this day. I had the Lego Naboo fighter set. I rented the Phantom Menace video game from Blockbuster, and I had some of the books and magazines. And of course, I own the VHS for Phantom Menace to this day. But as for my thoughts on Phantom Menace, I mean, I'll always have a special place in my heart for it, but otherwise, yeah. In retrospect, it is not that good of a Star Wars movie, and it could have been better, but hey. Now, Attack of the Clones, I'm pretty sure everybody was wondering that, okay, hopefully Lucas can learn from his mistakes from that movie, and clearly he didn't. He just kind of doubled down, and while, again, I don't think this is a terrible movie, and I always have a special place in my heart for it, but otherwise, yeah, this movie got more hate, specifically for the dialogue, the acting. They aged up Anakin Skywalker, who is now played by Hayden Christensen, and look, generally speaking, I'm not here to criticize any of the actors from the prequel trilogy, but these movies are just underwritten, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault that they were afraid to question George Lucas. They trusted him, and they did exactly what he asked them to do. There was more CGI in this movie compared to The Phantom Menace, but hey, at least the music is good. Across the Stars is one of my favorite pieces of Star Wars music, and I totally forgot to mention Duel of the Fates, which is another piece of Star Wars music that is still celebrated to this day. I have this newspaper clipping that I still have to this day where it explains the characters from the movie and who they are in the original trilogy and what they're expected to do in the next movie. Now, as far as my merch that I have for this movie, I mean, Attack of the Clones was one of the first DVDs my family ever had. I have the Battlefront and Starfighter video game. I remember my drum teacher had a whole bunch of posters of Star Wars. One that I remember particularly is that had all the Sith Lords from both the original and the prequel trilogy. Now, Revenge of the Sith, which is the reason we are all here, I remember the hype for this movie was too real because it was the movie that promised to get us what we were all waiting for, and that was how Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader when he turned to the dark side. And generally speaking, this is definitely the best of the three movies, and I'll say it, my second favorite Star Wars movie of all time. It was the first Star Wars movie to ever get a PG-13 rating, and granted, some of the hate was still there, but it was still a vast improvement over the previous two movies. When I saw this movie in the theater for its 20th anniversary, the hype was there, everyone was there, we all clapped and to all the memes. I did count all the memes in this movie, and there is just too many to count for, but here's a supercut of some of my favorite ones.
This is where the fun begins. My powers have doubled since the last time we met, Count.
Good. Twice the pride, double the fall.
Do it. Wait a minute. How did this happen? We're smarter than this.
Your lightsabers will make a fine addition to my collection.
You are on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of master.
What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?
Do you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? Hello there.
If one is to understand the great mystery, one must study all its aspects, not just the dogmatic, narrow view of the Jedi.
Use my knowledge, I beg you. So uncivilized.
I am the Senate.
It's treason, then.
Master Skywalker, there are too many of them. What are we going to do?
Anakin, you're breaking my heart.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground! You underestimate my power! Don't try it!
John Williams went hard in the motherfucking paint in this movie. The CGI in this movie looks a hell of a lot better than the first two movies. But overall, Revenge of the Sith, I think the reason this movie still stand the test of time, mainly because of how relatable everyone felt when seeing this movie in the theater for its 20th anniversary, because of how democracy is literally failing in real life right now, and then we see it in this movie, and it just kind of felt like something we could all connect with.
This is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.
And of course, all the merch I have for this movie. I had the Revenge of the Sith video game, which I still have to this day, and I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite video games of all time. I had this Vanity Fair cover that united the original trilogy and prequel trilogy. I have the Burger King watch. But to me, this will always be my second favorite because of how it started one way, and then by the end, it just ends all in tragedy. This was just a fun ride to watch someone fall. Now, despite some criticisms here and there, we had a pretty solid 6-movie run to work off of. And quick side note, I gotta address some of the special edition changes, and most of the special edition changes don't really bother me. Some of them enhance the original trilogy, some of them don't. But the biggest one that pisses me off the most is during Return of the Jedi, when George Lucas decided to have Darth Vader yell "No!" on his pit. You know, kind of like how he yelled "No!" in Revenge of the Sith. Of all the changes, that's the one that pissed me off the most. But other than that, you know, Han Solo not shooting first, alright, whatever. The music at the end of the Return of the Jedi, we get to see all the rest of the galaxy celebrate the fall of Emperor Palpatine, perfect. Now, for a long time, we all thought that was literally the last Star Wars movie and we would not get any more. But little did we all know, some more movies are on the way. George Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney, and we were getting more Star Wars movies. Now, the day Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney, a lot of people like to consider that D-Day, but honestly, y'all have nowhere to blame but yourself for why Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney. Alright, he got tired of y'all criticizing his work, so he just said, alright, I'm gonna just hand this off to someone else. So yeah, y'all are the reason we are oversaturated with Star Wars content right now for the past 10 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So yeah, Lucasfilm was bought by Disney. We were getting some new Star Wars movies. We have Star Wars The Force Awakens, which, like The Phantom Menace before it, I remember the hype for that was too real. And it awoke the Star Wars fan in me. And when I saw it, it was good, you know? Definitely an improvement over the prequels, but there was definitely some criticisms of it, and definitely not the one that would divide the audience. But J.J. Abrams directed it. I thought he did a good effort in making Star Wars great again. Though it was definitely weird not seeing the Fox logo in front of Star Wars. I remember the movie having a bunch of crowd moments that made me cheered. And maybe a safe movie at the time was just best for Star Wars, just to pretty much put the fans at ease. And John Williams returned for the music and gave us Rey's theme, which is still a good piece of Star Wars music. And it was a good starting point for a new trilogy. And how I feel about this movie 10 years later, that's exactly how I feel. It was just a good starting point for a new trilogy. I just wish the rest of the trilogy was just better. And then we got Rogue One, which is the first Star Wars spinoff in which it would bridge the gap between the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy, and we get to see how the Rebels got the plans to the Death Star. Now, at the time, I didn't appreciate this movie as much as I do now, but now I do. I just like how dark this movie is. I like how it was its own thing and was able to stand on its own, even though it is building off of the first Star Wars film, A New Hope. But in retrospect, almost 10 years later, to me, this is the best thing to ever come out of the Disney era of Star Wars. And it even made A New Hope that much better for me. And now the movie that single-handedly divided the audience, The Last Jedi, which was directed by Rian Johnson. I'm not going to get too much into it, but we all remember when this movie came out, the hate for this movie was too real. And while this movie has fans that appreciate this movie, it still doesn't change the fact that this movie had its issues. But I will say, I think this movie did a good job on how it handled Luke Skywalker. Some people may disagree, and that's fine, but I feel like this was just a natural progression of Luke Skywalker. Plus, this movie had a fair share of good memes to work off of. More! But overall, I've made my peace with this movie, and I do think Rian Johnson really didn't do nothing wrong. He made his own Star Wars movie, he was allowed to do so, and he did. Then the next spinoff was Solo, the movie that nobody asked for, and the hype just wasn't there, and then we all know the director's trouble. First it was Phil Lord and Chris Miller, then Ron Howard was brought on to direct, and I'm not going to get too into that, and overall, I just never really cared for this movie until I rewatched it, and I made my peace with it, and I had more fun with it than I did before. So I just live for all the fun moments in this, and Alden Ehrenreich, he was a good young Han Solo. But it still doesn't change the fact that this movie was just unnecessary. And then The Rise of Skywalker, which was not only the third film in the sequel trilogy, but the last Star Wars movie ever made. And J.J. Abrams was brought back to direct again, and he made a safe movie that pleased nobody, in my opinion. Now, this is another one where I've made my peace with, but it still left a sour taste in my mouth, and especially after watching these movies in my personal Machete order, it still left a sour taste in my mouth because, like, so this is how the saga ends. Not on a high note, but on a whimper. This is clearly the weakest of the newest trilogy, and a clear indicator that they did not have a plan for this trilogy. As for my relationship with other Star Wars content under Disney, I mean, I've never seen the holiday special, nor have I seen any of those straight-to-video Ewok movies. I've seen the Clone Wars movie and didn't really care for that, and I've only seen the last season of the Clone Wars show, but I like the episodes that tied into Revenge of the Sith, and I've heard numerous times that the Clone Wars cartoon is actually good, and I believe it just from the couple of episodes that I've seen. As for Rebels, never really watched. The Bad Batch, I watched the first couple of episodes and never really picked it back up. I did like Tales of the Jedi. I have yet to watch Tales of the Empire in Underworld, and I did like Visions just for it just being an anthology of different Star Wars stories that are not tied to Star Wars canon. The first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian were excellent. The third season, The Book of Boba Fett was underwhelming. I like parts of the Obi-Wan show, specifically the finale. Look, Andor is without a doubt the best Star Wars show, but I just don't care for it. Look, my beef with Andor is just, look, I go to Star Wars just to watch people go zoom, zoom, zoom. I don't want to watch people go pew, 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 pew. And just all the political intrigue and the rise of the rebellion, all that's cool and all, but it just wasn't that exciting to me. But if you like it, that's awesome. It just wasn't my cup of tea. I did like parts of the Ahsoka show, the Acolyte. Moving on. And Skeleton Crew, again, just didn't really care for. And now this is the part where we get into my new Machete order. It used to be one thing, but with all the new movies, I went back and watched them in this entire order, and I enjoyed watching these movies in this order. Well, at least I did. It started off a bit rough, but then it just got better and better. But then the last 2 movies, that's when it kind of ended on a sour note, but didn't really leave that much of an impact on me. But let me explain. So basically, this is the Machete order that I went with. Force Awakens, Solo, Rogue One, A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, Return of the Jedi, The Last Jedi, and then Rise of Skywalker. Pretty complex Machete order, isn't it? Let me explain. You start with The Force Awakens as a good starting off point because with that, it's basically like you're taking place in present day. You're getting introduced to all the newer characters, but then you're also getting introduced to the old characters. And you're learning about these old characters and learning about their stories and who they are, and you just want to learn more about them. And it's evident at the death of Han Solo, and then we end the film with Luke Skywalker, in which you spend the whole movie trying to get to, and then once it ends, you're like, who's this Luke Skywalker? And now this is the point where we go backwards in time, starting with Solo, in which we get some backstory about Solo and why everyone liked him in Force Awakens and why he was so impactful and important. You also hear more about Chewie and Lando, who will become important in the movies to come. Since we are starting with The Force Awakens, you get to more about the Millennium Falcon in this Kessel Run that was mentioned briefly in The Force Awakens. Basically, you go to these movies next so that you care more about Han Solo going forward, and then when you get back to the present time, it's just that much more impactful to know that he is not here at this very moment. Plus, this movie is also a good way to see the Republic under the Empire, because in The Force Awakens, it's under the First Order, and now we get to see that contrast with the Empire and how much damage the Empire did to the Republic. And then we get to see more of that going into Rogue One, in which we see the Rebel Alliance fighting against the Empire. We see the Rebels getting the plans to the Death Star, which contrasts with Starkiller Base in The Force Awakens, but we get to see what that was like beforehand. And we get to see more of the galactic war aspect of the war against the Empire. And of course, we all know this also ties into A New Hope. And also, this is also the first time we see Darth Vader, because he is briefly mentioned in The Force Awakens, in which you're wondering who is this Darth Vader and how is he tied to the Skywalkers. And then we get to see him be a badass for a little bit at the end of Rogue One. And of course, there's CG Tarkin and CG Leia, who will become important in the next movie. A New Hope is really where you get to learn more about the older characters, like Luke, Han, and Leia, because Han at this point, he's more older, and we already know a little about him, and of course we already know a little bit about Leia, and then we get to learn more about Luke, who is introduced at the end of The Force Awakens, and we get to see how he is important from his beginnings, and we get introduced to Obi-Wan, who will become important when we go even further in the past. And of course, you got the droids, in which we start this movie off with, and we saw them introduced in The Force Awakens. We saw them briefly in Rogue One, and we get to see them in more of a context and how they managed to stay around during all three of the trilogies. And of course, because you watch Rogue One, it makes the destruction of the Death Star in this movie that much more impactful, knowing what the rebels went through. And we get to see Luke continue on his journey in becoming a Jedi, or at least we get to see the start of it. And then, of course, naturally is The Empire Strikes Back, which is a continuation of A New Hope. I mean, same concept. We get to learn more about the older characters. We get to see more of Luke's journey to becoming a Jedi. We get introduced to Yoda. We get to learn more about the Force and the Jedi. We get introduced briefly to Emperor Palpatine, who will really become important in the next 4 movies to come. And we get to see more of the war against the Empire and how destructive it was. And hey, there's Lando, and much more older and not played by Donald Glover. We get to catch up on his relationship with Han, which is more impactful after seeing him in Solo, and to see him betray Han but then come back around. And the heroes fall, and of course, the whole reason why for the next 3 movies that you view next, it is the reveal of Darth Vader being Luke's father. And you're like, what? Darth Vader is Luke's father? Even though you already kind of had that spoiled doing The Force Awakens and a couple of other movies, but still, it's because you see the reveal of Darth Vader in this movie. Now, you go back even further in time to learn more about Darth Vader, more specifically Anakin Skywalker, from a young age to becoming a Jedi to his downfall and joining the Sith. Now, at this point, you're pretty much just letting the prequels play out in order. Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith. You get the concept. Throughout this time, you learn about Anakin Skywalker and why he turned to the dark side. You get to learn more about Obi-Wan Kenobi during his younger years before he became the old, wise old Ben that we see in A New Hope. We see his old master, and we see all the flaws of the Jedi and how Anakin was tempted to go to the dark side and the downfall of the Jedi. And that will definitely play a part once we finally go back to the present. Of course, you see the Clone Wars, the fall of democracy, the fall of the Republic, and the rise of Emperor Palpatine, who is the overarching villain of the entire Skywalker saga. And then at the end of Revenge of the Sith, when he is fully Darth Vader, that's where we go back further in time to Return of the Jedi. And like I said, after Revenge of the Sith, it's going to make his turn back to the light that much more impactful when he turns on the Emperor. We see the rebellion win, and the Republic is restored. Oh yeah, Jabba was mentioned in Solo, and we finally follow that up here in Return of the Jedi. We see the fall of Emperor Palpatine. The Jedi have finally returned, briefly. And of course, Luke becomes a legend. And now we go back to the present with The Last Jedi, in which now that we spent all this time getting all this backstory about all the older characters, and particularly Luke Skywalker, so now we get back to this moment in which Rey hands him his lightsaber, and it's just that much more impactful when he just tosses it over. And I'm like, wait a minute, we just learned so much about you, so much good things you did, and why you just giving up? And so, yeah, you basically back into the present and just let the rest of the sequel trilogy play out. Last Jedi, and then Rise of Skywalker. You get the gist of that. And that's the Machete order that I went with, and like I said, I really enjoyed it. It was fun revisiting Star Wars. It was fun revisiting these movies, flaws and all. Now, would I do the Machete order again? I probably would, but I'd do it a different order. In which, if I do this again, like, let's say they re-release A New Hope for its 50th anniversary, then the next Machete order that I might try is starting off with The Force Awakens, and then go back further in time and just start with The Phantom Menace, and then just go from there until I get caught up to The Last Jedi, and then Rise of Skywalker. But overall, like I said, I have fun revisiting these movies, especially since my relationship with Star Wars has soured over the years with all the Star Wars content that they have given us. I personally think that they should just stop and let Star Wars go for a few years and then come back strong. But this did reassure me why I love Star Wars. It was fun to watch Star Wars through a different context. That's it for today. Did you enjoy this video? What are your thoughts on everything that was discussed within this video? Have you ever watched Star Wars in Machete order? And what are your general thoughts on the Star Wars franchise, both then and now? Let me know in the comment section below. This is your boy Bankful B of the Lassiter Factor. Stay safe, wash your hands, peace.